My presentation is about the 1972 Hockey Summit Series and how it shaped Canadian history and culture. For the other part of my presentation, I will answer the question of whether or not Paul Henderson should be in the Hockey Hall of Fame. A summit is the top of a mountain, its highest point. Once you reach the summit, you can climb no higher. This is what the Summit Series was. It was the peak. The best hockey players of one country against the best of the other, in this case Canada versus the Soviet Union. When people think about this series, the first thing most of them think about is Paul Henderson's famous goal. This goal was scored with just seconds left, and it was crucial to Team Canada. With about a minute left, Henderson, who was on the bench, did what no player should ever do. He called from the bench for Pete Mahavlich to come to the off the ice so that he could come on. Mahavlich listened to Henderson's call and came off. And so Henderson joined the fray. Henderson took a shot but fell. As he got back up, Esposito took a wild shot at the goal. The Soviet goalie blocked the shot, and Henderson took the puck as it bounced off their goalie. He shot, but it was blocked again. Henderson got the puck again, and the goalie was down, and Henderson scored. Overjoyed, Henderson jumped into the arms of the nearest Canadian player as the team fled onto the ice. This goal was the game-winning goal and will be remembered by Canadians all over the country. Most Canadians remember where they were when this historic goal was scored. I think that you will agree with me when we see it and hear it played back. Of most of us still get chills.
Down that way, here's a shot! Henderson made a wild stab for it fell. Here's another shot, right in front of score! Henderson has scored for Canada! Henderson right in front of the net! And the fans of the team are going wild. Henderson right in front of the Soviet goal with 34 seconds left in the game. An absolute mob scene over Paul Henderson, as there should be.
In 1972, Canada was still riding on the tide of nationalism. The country's centennial birthday, Expo 67, a new national flag, and its renewed obsession with Canadian identity contributed to this. There was also unrest regarding Canadian unity because of the recent FLQ crisis and increasing support for Quebec separation. Although there were conflicts within its borders, on the world stage, Canada was eager to show a united front. Internationally, the Cold War was still causing polarization between the East and the West. This war now will be fought out on ice, Canada versus the Soviet Union. As famous sports commentator Foster Hewitt says, this is really life and death down here. Down on that ice, it is just sheer war. Before the series, Canada's team was in a 30-year losing streak. This happened because of a change in the way Canada put together their team. Europe liked the Canadian game of hockey, so they decided to make their own version of the game. Canada wanted to play against the countries in Europe. They let Canada play, but only if they used amateur players. Canada agreed, and every year sent one of their club teams to play for Canada. Then, one year, Canada didn't send a club team, but sent players selected from various club teams. This didn't work, and Canada began its 30-year losing streak. Canada was shamed year after year by watching our amateur players lose to the supposed amateurs of the Soviet Union. Everyone knew the Soviet players were actually professional hockey players, that the Soviet government insisted were amateurs. The Summit Series was finally Canada's opportunity to prove that we were the best. Our best NHL professionals against the best of the Soviet Union. The Summit Series was an 8-game series. The first 4 games would be played in 4 different Canadian cities and 4 in Russia. The team with the most games won at the end of the series would win the series itself. Canada was expected to dominate and win the series without a problem. This expectation was totally wrong. What was supposed to be an easy and friendly exhibition turned into a month-long roller coaster ride of emotions, and a hard-fought battle that was nearly lost. This series was really a battle between two ways of life, democracy and communism. This was the Cold War on ice. Each team would do anything to win. Canadian players would get phone calls at night from Soviet players, waking them up and making them lose sleep. The first game in the Summit Series took place in Montreal. Canada came into the game thinking that they would dominate the whole series. The Canadian team had no idea how the Russian team played, so they came into the first game without a clue how good their opponents were. As the game progressed, Canada saw how powerful the team on the opposite end was. Here is how Ken Dryden describes the first game. The Soviets had exposed us utterly. On the same ice surface, they had been our mirror, playing a different way. They had made us see ourselves, perhaps for the first time, and we didn't like what we saw. So the Soviets won the first game 7-3. The second game was the only game in Canada that the Canadian team won. This game was in Toronto, and the score was 4-1 for Canada. The third game took place in Winnipeg and was a tie. The score was 4-4. The final Canadian game was in Vancouver. Canada lost 5-3 and was booed off the ice. Before Phil Esposito left the ice, he addressed the Canadian fans in his famous television interview. His emotional speech motivated Team Canada and brought them together as a team. It also rallied the country behind their team, and again, 3,000 boisterous and proud flag-waving Canadian fans accompanied the team to Russia for the final 4 games. I think that we would all remember this emotional plea from Phil Esposito.
I remember Esau just letting it go, and I was hot, and there were a couple of people up in the stands that were throwing things at me, and they were yelling obscenities at me.
The first game behind the Iron Curtain was yet another loss for Team Canada, although they played their best game so far in this series. The score was 5-4. In this game, Henderson hits the boards hard, and after the doctor looked at him, he told him that he had a concussion. Henderson insisted that he was fine and asked the coach if he could play. Against the will of the doctor, the coach let Henderson play. He would then score another goal and would give them a 4-1 lead in the third period. The sixth game in the series was full of penalties biased against Canada, but in the end, Canada won 3-2. Henderson scored the winning goal. After the win in Game 6, 50,000 telegrams were sent to the Canadian team in Russia from excited Canadian fans. The seventh game was another victory for Team Canada. The final score was 4-3. Once again, the game-winning goal was scored by Paul Henderson. The Soviets would do anything to win, even cheat. The 2 referees that were supposed to ref the game were switched to 2 German referees who refed the Game 6. One of the 2 who were supposed to ref had mysteriously fallen ill. Team Canada didn't like that and threatened that they would not play if those 2 German referees. In the end, they decided that the Soviets would pick one referee and Canada would pick the other. The game commenced. Even though Paul Henderson scored 3 of the 4 game-winning goals, he's not in the Hockey Hall of Fame. He also scored as many people call it, the goal of the century. And you can see with these stats that Henderson is better than some people in the Hockey Hall of Fame. Of course, he was one of the better players in the Summit Series. This does not seem right. The Summit Series by now has the status of a legend, and yet the person who scored the goal that let us win is not in the Hall. The Summit Series was a great series that represented the struggle that was going on at that time. On the outside, it was just a preseason hockey series, but really it was a conflict between communism and democracy. Both sides fought hard, but in the end, democracy won over communism. One of the heroes in this battle was Paul Henderson. He fought very hard, even when he was concussed and the doctor said he wouldn't play, he pushed through and in the end scored 3 game winners, one of which was the goal of the century.